All right, gang, so we're going to take a look at different economic systems to be able to identify the features and priorities of a command, market, and mixed economies. Let's dive into it. So as we take a look at this picture here, we've got a couple of different images that we're looking at. Up top, we have Phil's grocery store, and then down below, we have something called the People's Grocery Store. And so let's just take a look at Phil's grocery store. And it says, Phil's grocery store, we carry what you want. We've got a couple of different characters here. We've got this fellow saying, wow, what a selection. And then this lady here saying, so many choices, so little money. And then down at the bottom we have the People's Grocery Store. Just arrived, new products from the Government Distribution Center. Hey, they only have paper towels. I don't need any more paper towels. At least they're cheap. And then this fellow in the back, hey, what are we waiting in line before? I think we all wonder and feel like that sometimes ourselves. So where are we? Well, we're at a grocery store is where we're at. I don't mean where are we in like like metaphorical sense. I mean literally where are these people? And they're at a grocery store. Who decides what to buy? And I'm just going to divide this into two here. And at Phil's grocery store, who decides what to buy at Phil's? Well, there are two people that decide what to buy at Phil's. There's Phil and the people. There's Phil and the people, and of course Phil in a way decides, Phil decides what to buy because he decides what to stock on the shelves. And how does Phil decide? Well, he also probably decides based on what the people want and what the customers want, what the consumer wants, right? He's not going to carry something that the customers don't want. Conversely, he'll probably make sure that he stocks the shelves with what the customers want. But again, it's ultimately up to the people, up to the customer to decide what they want to carry and what they want to buy. And then at the People's Grocery Store, we're going to say that the government decides what to buy. In this case, and in a lot of cases in an economic or a global studies context, the people sometimes also refers to the government. The people can refer to you and I as like actual people and what we really want. But in this case, in an economic systems context, when we talk about the people are kind of another word or a euphemism for the government. And so who decides here? Well, not the people, even though it says the people, but it would be the government. Advantages, and we'll just keep our little division here as we look to decide, advantages of Phil's grocery store. We've got choice, right? We see the shelves are well stocked, a lot of different variety, we'll say. There's competition. And we're going to say Phil, right? Phil is an advantage, not Phil himself, but Phil gets to own and run that grocery store. And that's kind of a nice deal. Advantages to the People's Grocery Store. Well, what might be some advantages to the People's Grocery Store? Products are cheap. We all like things that are cheap, and we see here that they have cheap products, so that's always nice to have, cheap products. And needs met, kinda, right? If you need paper towels, well, then your needs are met because, hey, they've got cheap paper towels for you. However, if you don't need paper towels, well, that's kind of a bummer because your needs aren't really going to be met there. But you could get paper towels if that's what you wanted. What about disadvantages? Again, we're just keeping these two charts here. Disadvantages at Phil's, we're going to say cost. And your wants, we're going to say equals not always met, needs to. And what I mean by that is, let's take a look here. We've got this fellow. Notice he's got a very full cart, right? He's got a very full cart. And he's like, wow, what a selection. He is clearly loving life here. Phil's grocery store is great for him. But then we've got this lady here. And notice her cart is very empty. And she says, so many choices, so little money. And she doesn't mean, wow, there's so many choices and it's so cheap. She means, wow, there's a lot of choices and I myself, I don't have a lot of money, right? Her cart's pretty empty and she's going, it's great that there's all these choices, but I don't have a lot of money and I can't afford all of these things. Unlike this guy here who's like, wow, gimme, 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 gimme. So your wants, and in this case, the lady, she wants maybe a lot of different things. She's not going to get them. And it's perhaps that her needs might not always be met in this case too, because maybe she needs to decide what she can buy that week and what she can't buy that week. And so in the case of Phil's grocery store, a disadvantage, your needs might not be met in addition to your wants. Disadvantages to the People's Grocery Store equals no variety, no choice, no competition. It's just paper towels. And I'm guessing they probably don't even really have like a lot of choice in paper towels. It's not like select a size versus big sheet. It's not like multiply versus thin. It's just here's the paper towels you get and that's what you get. And then needs also might not be met, right? Because in this case, again, if you need paper towels, great. But if you don't need paper towels, which we all need more than just paper towels in our life, your needs aren't going to be met. And so there's certainly advantages and disadvantages to both. We are much more accustomed to Phil's grocery store here in the United States. This is something, not just Phil's. We have a whole variety of grocery stores, and we're used to kind of these full shelves with lots of choice, lots of variety, lots of competition. And that would also happen to be my preference as well, right, between the two, given the choice between the two. So that's just kind of setting the stage here, and we're going to actually circle back to Phil's and the People's here in a little bit as we see how Phil's grocery store and the People's grocery store are in a way an analogy or an example of larger economic systems that we might see around the world. So let's dive in. A blank is the way the country manages its money and resources to produce, buy, and sell goods. Well, that would be an economy, whereas a blank describes how an economy is organized. That is an economic system. So those are our two key vocab words there, an economy and an economic system. And then with our key vocab, we also have three basic economic questions. What should be produced? How is it going to be produced? And how should it be distributed? Or another way of thinking of that last question would be for whom, as in who should get it? What are we going to make? How are we going to make it? And then who is going to get it? All three of these questions, society, aka countries, must answer, right? Individuals answer these questions if you're starting a business, but then societies as a whole must also answer these questions as they decide what they're going to make, how their society is going to be run, how it's going to function. So let's dive in. We've got a little bit of background reading here. I'm going to go through this. I'm going to annotate. I'm going to highlight. I'm going to pick in some keywords and just kind of share my thoughts with you. Of course, you're always welcome to do this on your own. You don't necessarily need to listen to me, but if you want to, let's do this together. Basic economic decisions. All human beings have wants and needs. How do you get the things that you want and the things that you need? To obtain these items, people use resources. Resources are the supplies that are used to meet our wants and needs. Some types of resources, such as water, soil, plants, and animals, come from the earth, and these are called natural resources. Right? So resources are the supplies that we use to meet our wants and needs, and then some types of resources are natural resources, and those are the things that are coming from earth, coming from Mother Nature. Other resources are supplied by humans. Human resources include the labor, skills, and talents that people contribute. Countries also have wants and needs. Like individuals, nations must use resources to meet their needs. So on the individual micro scale, you and I, we all have our own wants and needs. We've got a variety of resources available to us to meet those wants and needs, although it is not an unlimited variety of wants and or unlimited variety of resources. The same is true for countries and nations. They've got wants, they've got needs, they've got resources available. They need to decide what to do with those resources in order to figure out how to meet their wants and needs. So, wants and resources. Not to be confused with wants and needs. What would happen if 14 students each wanted a glass of lemonade from a pitcher that contained only 12 glasses of lemonade? What if more students wanted a glass of lemonade? No matter how many people want lemonade, the pitcher still contains just 12 glasses. There is not enough for everyone. This is an example of limited supply and unlimited demand. This concept is also called scarcity, right? Limited supply and unlimited demand, right? And when we have this idea of scarcity, this idea of limited supply and unlimited demand, we should probably note that nearly everything is limited. And even if the supply of it isn't limited, oftentimes access to it might be limited. For example, there is a massive amount of fresh water on the planet Earth. There is enough fresh water to supply every human being with the fresh water that they need, but not all individuals have access to that fresh water. Same with food. Oftentimes we think about how we have a food issue on our planet and how there are people on this earth who are starving or malnourished or undernourished. And that is absolutely true. There are, in fact, millions of folks who don't have enough food, but we as a planet have enough food and we have the capability to produce enough food. So while we might have this nearly unlimited supply for food and a limited supply of food, in this case, it's an example of access to that food being limited. So while supply might be limited, oftentimes there are things where the supply might be unlimited, or we have more than enough supply, but access to it is limited. Anyway, this is an example of limited supply and unlimited demand. This concept is also called scarcity. The situation is not uncommon. It happens to individuals, also to countries. You probably can think of many personal examples as well as current and historical examples of limited supply and unlimited demand. The big example that I like to go with is something like diamonds, right? That's something that there is very high demand for, or you could also say phones, like cell phones. Those are things where there is very high demand for those products or for those services. There is very high demand, but there's a very limited supply. This is nothing new. We are all aware of this issue of, or this concept of supply and demand, right? Nothing is unlimited, and people want certain things, so there might be a very high demand and very low supply. And of course, we know that if there's very high demand for something but very low supply for it, then in fact the price for it, it goes up, right? It's all about supply and demand, regulating our prices. So let's look at some concrete examples, though, not these hypothetical diamonds and cell phones. One type of resource that everyone needs is energy. Energy is the power to do work. Energy resources are the supplies that provide the power to do work. Many types of energy resources exist in our world. Energy resources can be renewable or non-renewable. Renewable resources are resources that can be totally replaced or are always available naturally. They can be regenerated and replenished. Examples of renewable resources include water, trees, and energy from the wind and the sun. So we're talking things like solar energy, right? These are all examples of renewable energy. They're there. We don't have to work to recreate them, like it says. They're readily available naturally. They do not need to be regenerated or replenished. Those would be renewable resources. In contrast, are non-renewable resources. Non-renewable resources cannot be totally replaced. Once non-renewable resources are consumed, they are gone. Examples of non-renewable resources include fossil fuels, oil, coal, and natural gas. These fuels received their name because they were formed millions of years ago. Humans' increasing need for energy is taking its toll as supplies and non-renewable resources shrink. AKA, once it's gone, it's gone, right? Or at least for any time scale that would, matter to you or I as just kind of mere mortals. And so there again, we see this example of non-renewable resources. Oil, coal, these fossil fuels, they power our economy, they fuel our society, right? A vast majority of us, that's how we got to school today, or that's how you got to wherever it is that you're going today. You might have hopped in a vehicle that was powered by gas. Your home might be heated with natural gas or something like that. Again, these natural resources that are non-renewable. Even if you have a car like a Tesla, this electric car, where does that electricity come from? Well, if you head down the road to Monticello, our nuclear power plant, right, that is also a non-renewable resource. It's not a fossil fuel in this case, but again, these are all resources that are non-renewable. And once they're gone, once they're exhausted, once they're used, they are gone and they're not coming back. And so as we continue to progress, as a local society, as a national, as a country, as a global society, as we continue to progress, we need to figure out what types of energy resources are we going to use to power our society. We can continue on the path of non-renewable resources, which has gotten us to where we are, and we're likely to continue for some time in the near term, but eventually those non-renewable resources, those fossil fuels, they will be gone, and we'll have to figure out what alternative resources or alternative energy we are going to use. So again, this whole section is just to kind of illustrate this concept of wants and resources, wants and needs. We have these wants, we have this demand, we have resources which are limited. Some of them are renewable resources. They keep regenerating, and the demand for them, or rather the supply for these non-renewable resources, is practically unlimited. And then we also have non-renewable resources where the supply of the resources is in fact limited. But we need to figure out how we are going to divvy this up, how are we going to access this. Just like our intro example here talking about glasses of lemonade. 14 students, 12 glasses. What are we going to do? Do 2 students, do they get left out? Or do we take and we say, you know what, we've got a little extra, or we don't have enough, rather we've got too many students. How about we each take a little bit less to make sure that we're all provided for? And that's a very basic economic question. I know it seems silly. What would happen if we had 14 students and 12 glasses? Do we say, you know what, sorry Billy, sorry Johnny, no lemonade for you? And they could say, but I'm really parched, I'm really thirsty, I need it. We could say, too bad, so sad. Or we could say, do you have enough money to pay for it? And they might not. We could say, sorry, that's life in the lemonade lane. Or do we say, you know what, we're all going to get a little bit less lemonade because we're going to make sure that Billy and Johnny get their lemonade too because they're thirsty. You could say, but I want more because I really enjoy it. Fine, that's fair, that's your choice. But again, we as a society need to decide what we're going to do because we have this idea of limited resources, scarcity, and sometimes unlimited or nearly unlimited demand. Let's read on. Before we do, let's take a look. What is scarcity? Scarcity is the concept of limited resources and often, and I'm going to put this in parentheses, and often, here we go, unlimited demand, right? And it asks, how are the 3 basic economic questions related to the problem of scarcity? And up here in parentheses next to scarcity, I have limited supply. I'm going to write that up here as well. Limited supply, limited resources, those are all scarcity. And again, the 3 basic economic questions that everyone needs to answer. What are we going to make? How are we going to make it, and for whom, or how is it going to be distributed, and who's going to get it? And so how are those 3 basic questions related to the problem of scarcity? Well, here's the deal. If we had unlimited resources, we wouldn't have to make decisions about what we are going to make. But that first question, what are we going to make? There are limited resources. There are needs that are available. There is a limited supply of things, and because of that, we need to figure out what we are going to make because we only have so many resources on this earth. So we need to figure out what we are going to make and what we are going to produce. We also need to figure out how, because again, limited resources. Remember, time is also a resource. We do not have unlimited time. People, humans, we are also a resource. We do not have unlimited humans at our access to make things and to produce things. And then for whom? Again, it's limited, right? Everything is limited, and because there is not an unlimited supply of items, because there is not an unlimited supply of resources, we need to make these economic decisions. We need to make these choices. Let's actually take a look at a very concrete example here. Making a new drug, a new pharmaceutical drug in this case. And we've got this little infographic, and I want to start down here on the bottom with the company. What drug should we make? How do we make a profit, right? So a company needs to decide, should we make a new drug? Should we make a new vaccine? Should we make a new pharmaceutical drug? There are all kinds of medical ailments and diseases and illnesses out there, and the drug company needs to decide, should we make a drug for that or not? And if we are going to, how do we make sure that we make a profit, right? Because drug companies, pharmaceutical companies, these medical companies, they also, on one hand, they might have this desire to cure a disease, to help individuals, but also they are a company, they are a corporation, they also want to make a profit, they want to make money. And sometimes in the society that we have, sometimes they're going to weigh those 2 factors, and making a certain type of drug or vaccine or pharmaceutical drug, it might be very expensive. It might help people, it might help a small number of people, it might help a lot of people, but that company also needs to decide, are we going to be able to make a profit on it? Because if we can't make a profit, then maybe we don't actually want to make that drug. And you might say, hey, wait, healthcare companies, pharmaceutical companies, you should also help people because like that's the right thing to do and it's a good thing to do to help people. And they might say, yes, we agree. It's good to help people, but we also need to make a profit. And so they got to weigh those competing interests, right? In a society, in a economy that is more open and more choice driven and more market based, more on that in a second, those companies get to decide. No one's going to say, you must make that drug to help people, because the drug company might say, well, yeah, sure, we want to help people, but we can't afford to do that. We need to make a profit. So that's the what. And then the how. Right? And then after that, we talk about the how. So we bring in our scientists, we bring in our researcher, right? So they're going to evaluate the drug. Is it effective? Will it actually help people? And then we also have the government that is going to regulate that and say, you know what, there are certain types of drugs you can and cannot make, or there are certain types of tests you can and cannot do, or there are certain types of regulations that we're going to put on top of these drugs or these vaccines to ensure that they are safe, because we also need to ensure the safety of our people. So we've got the what first, and then we've got the how second, where the scientists determine, the best course of action, the most effective course of action. And then we also have a government body or a regulatory body often coming in and just kind of regulating things and applying some regulations, some rules to ensure that they are safe. And then lastly, we've got the for whom. In this case, in our scenario, we have the doctor deciding, well, who is going to get that new drug? Does it actually work for my patient? Because if it doesn't, I don't want to give it to them. Or how well or how likely is it to work for them? And then the patient himself, they're saying, well, do I need this new drug? I heard about it on TV or I read about it in a journal. Do I actually need that drug, right? And we decide who is going to get it. And although it's not indicated on this as well, another person that we see in this particular scenario in terms of who is going to get it, there's also sometimes in the case of the United States, the ability to pay. We might say, well, there is a treatment available. There are pharmaceuticals or vaccines or drugs or treatments available to you, Mr. Patient. The doctor is saying this. And then the patient says, that's great, but I can't afford it or my insurance won't cover it. Again, that's us as a society saying, sure, what are we going to make? We're going to make a drug to cure this terrible disease. The government's going to ensure that it's safe. The researchers are going to do their job. The doctor is going to say it's going to benefit the patient, and the patient is going to say, do I need it? And the doctor is going to say, yes, but, access to that drug is limited, or supply of that drug is limited. So how do we determine who gets access, in that case, to that pharmaceutical, to that drug, to that vaccine? And we might say, sorry, patient, your insurance doesn't cover it and you don't have access to it. And that is a very real and difficult concept for us to sometimes, pardon the pun, that's a difficult pill to swallow, right? Where we say there are drugs and treatments available, but we're not going to give them to everyone, or we're not going to provide them to everyone, because maybe the drug company says, we can't provide it to anyone unless they can pay for it. Or maybe the government comes in and says, no, we need to make sure that everyone gets access to those treatments in our country and in our society. We know that the drug company might make less money, but that's what we have decided as a society what we're going to do, because it's all about, you guessed it, making choices. If peoples of all nations have unlimited wants but face limited resources, what must happen? We must make choices. Do we continue to use non-renewable resources? If so, at what rate should we be using them? Should we switch to renewable resources? These are conversations that are taking place in our country right now today, right? You turn on the TV, you listen to what's happening in the news, and these conversations are taking place at a federal level and at a state level. What types of resources? How are we going to power our economy? Are we going to stick with fossil fuels and non-renewable? Or are we going to make a transition to alternative fuels and renewable resources? If we are, when are we going to do it? At what cost and how? We must weigh the opportunity cost, or the value of what we must give up to acquire something else. Or using renewable resources versus non-renewable resources. We must take into account these and many more considerations as we make choices now and in the future. So again, do we say to, for example, the coal industry, which is a non-renewable resource, do we say to that industry and to the thousands and tens of thousands of jobs and that sizable part of the economy in some parts of the country, do we say, sorry, we're going to transition away from this non-renewable resource in favor of something else, in favor of a renewable resource? We might say that, and we might say it's better for the planet, it's better in the long run, but in the short term, we are giving up those jobs, we are giving up that segment of the economy. And so it's not always an easy choice to make. These are difficult choices because we always have to weigh the pros and cons, and that's really what economics is all about. It's all about weighing choices, it's all about weighing decisions, it's about weighing needs and wants, and it's about weighing our goals and priorities as a society. What do we prioritize? What do our goals reflect about who we are as a society? And we're going to get to that in our next segment, but today let's wrap this up. Economic resources are another important resource. Economic resources include the goods and services that society provides and how they are produced, distributed, and used, right? How a society decides on the ownership and distribution of its economic resources is its economic system. Do you ever stop to think about the goods and services you use in a single day? You should. How did these goods and services become available to you, right? We take that for granted. It's just something that's given to us, or maybe we just go to the store and we purchase it. But do we ever stop to think about what's available to us, the cost, why it's available, how it was made, and all of those behind the scenes things? Stop and think about that next time you're at the store, or next time you're, clicking something and adding it to your shopping cart and hitting the old checkout button. Think about that for a little bit. Different economic systems. We can break down the discussion of economic systems into 3 questions. What should we produce? How should it be produced? And how should it be distributed, or for whom? Different nations have different answers to these questions. One main type of economic system is a market economy, also referred to as capitalism. In market economies, the means of production are privately owned. Production is guided and income is distributed through sales and demands of products and resources. So in the United States, we have a pretty market-based economy. And in this case, when we see privately owned, we're talking about people, right? When we talk about private, we're talking about people. That is, individuals own the businesses. Individuals make most of the choices. Producers and consumers. And this gets confusing because privately means people. Privately literally means you and I, individuals. We own things. We own businesses. We own corporations. We decide what to produce. We decide what to purchase. Compare that with a command economy. In a command economy, the means of production are publicly owned by the government, and production and distribution are controlled by a central governing authority. Communism is a form of a command economy. And here, when we talk about publicly owned, we're talking about the government. The idea being that people, you and I, we vote for our elected representatives. We vote for our officials. The government is made up of people. It's a government of the people, by the people, for the people. And therefore, if something is owned publicly, it is owned not by an individual, not by you and I, but it is owned by the government. It is owned by the public. It is owned by the society as a whole at large. However, one thing that we need to make note of here, and although we see government often as kind of like this signal word or this keyword for command economy, we should probably note in big letters here, however, government does not equal bad, right? Just because you might read about government regulations or government influence on society or on the economy, that isn't always a bad thing, right? We talk about regulations. For example, it's illegal to sell certain products to minors, right? Tobacco products, you can't sell it to folks under the age of 18. Alcohol products, you can't sell it to folks under the age of 21, right? That is the government stepping in and saying, we're going to regulate this industry. We're going to regulate this business. Now, you could say, well, that's a command economy. That's communism. You could say that and you would be wrong, right? The government stepping in and regulating, the sale of alcohol or tobacco to minors, that's not communism. That's just government regulation. That's government regulation that we as a society have said, you know what? Our government officials, our elected government officials, we have certain regulations on certain products, and we are going to regulate those products because we feel that they are unsafe or perhaps harmful to certain groups of society, right? That's not communism. That's just the government getting involved. So let's read on. What is a mixed economy? A mixed economy is just that. Parts of the economy may be privately owned, and parts may be owned by the government or another authority. The United States has a mixed economy. Another economic system is socialism. In socialist societies, property and distribution of goods and income are controlled by the community. How do individuals get goods and services they need under each of these economic systems? I just want to note something here. Excuse me. In this mixed economy, whereas a market is based mostly on the people, command is based mostly on the government, a mixed society is a mixture of just that, of people and government, right? In a mixed society, people and government, we producers and consumers, right? We also have government regulations, like I talked about with alcohol and tobacco, for example. And in a mixed economy, which is what we have here in the United States, there are private businesses, there are also publicly owned services or businesses. There are government regulations. Those are all examples of a mixed economy where kind of everyone works together. And sometimes in a government or even in a mixed economy, you will have the government providing certain services or certain resources or certain types of businesses. For example, education, right? We have a public education system in the United States that is provided by the government. It's not provided by private businesses. We also have, for example, another example would be like fire and police services, law enforcement, right? Those are all government provided services. We don't have a private fire company, right? When you call, because your house is on fire, that goes to a government organization, a government provided fire protection. That's not a privately owned thing. Education, fire and police, healthcare. Right? In the United States, we do have some government-provided healthcare. Our veterans in the Veterans Administration, right? Our men and women who serve in uniform in the military, their healthcare is provided for them through the government. That is a government-provided institution. Medicare, that is healthcare provided for, and Medicaid, that is healthcare provided for our seniors, our elderly, but people who don't have access to healthcare and to health insurance, right? In some societies, in some countries like Canada, our friendly neighbors to the north, they provide healthcare to everybody. They said, you know what, that's a right that we are going to ensure that all of our people have. In the United States, it's more of a mixed bag where we've said, nope, we're going to allow private insurance companies. So here again is kind of this other example. In a mixed economy, you've got a whole wide variety of private, individual, producer, consumer, but also public, government, and regulation kind of working together to determine the answer to those three main economic questions. What should we produce? How should we produce it? And for whom? All of those tend to, or in theory, should work together in that mixed economic system. Now, reading on, closing it out. Almost all countries around the world have a mixed economy. They fall somewhere on the spectrum. Some countries have less government involvement and considered more market, whereas other countries have more involvement and considered to be more command, but all are mixed, right? With very, very few exceptions, every economic system in the world falls somewhere on this spectrum. The more governmental involvement, the more governmental regulation, the more command an economic system would tend to be. The less governmental regulation, the less governmental involvement, the more on the people, the more market it would be. And so on the market side, I'm just going to write people. And on the command side, I'm just going to write government. And again, I know that gets confusing because the People's Grocery Store is way over here, even though the market side is more people-based. So there we go. The big takeaway that you should have from all of this: every economic system around the world would be considered a market economy, right? Some of them are going to be much more market-based with fewer regulation, fewer government involvement, fewer publicly or governmental owned and provided services. On the other hand of the spectrum, you have countries, you have societies, you have cultures that are going to be more command, where there's more governmental regulation, more governmental involvement. And more publicly owned corporations and fewer privately owned corporations and businesses. But all of them are going to be mixed. All of them are somewhere in the middle. And there is no magical formula, no secret sauce, one right answer. There's more than one way to skin an economy, as they like to say. I don't know if they like to say that, but that's what I like to say. And our task really is going to be to figure out, what is the certain formula, the secret sauce that, we as individuals feel is best for us as a society, because us as individuals, we make up our society. And what we have now could change, right? We could say, we want more of a market-based system and we want fewer regulations. Or we as a society might say, we want more of a command-based system and we want more governmental involvement and provided services and regulations. All of that has to do with our priorities, and all of that has to do with another video, another talk for another time. Hope you're doing well. Talk to you later. See ya.